The FDA calls it a groundbreaking step in scientific research.
It's a complex model of what's happening in the brain
that could lead to new treatments.
It is a very ambitious goal, for sure.
Without using animals.
This will discover better drugs.
But are these new approaches ready?
You still need that living system.
I think the notion of being able to do everything that I do in a petri dish, quite frankly, is bull.
This week on Open Record,
we do have the technology to replace the animals.
The federal effort to move beyond animals, and why some say not so fast. From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, joined by Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs as well. Thank you for being here, Jenna.
No problem.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, June 25th, and as we record, we're still waiting for new developments from multiple investigations involving Ridgeland Farms, a controversial Wisconsin operation that breeds and sells beagle puppies for laboratory research. Meanwhile, we are learning more about major changes in the way the federal government plans to approach research and development of new drugs and therapeutics. The government says it is moving away from animal testing. We're going to talk about some of the new technologies that could reduce or replace the need for animals, and we'll hear from one expert on why animal research may not be going away anytime soon. We're going to start all of that when we come right back.
We are back on Open Record. For all the things that we have talked about on this podcast, one that has got the biggest reaction has been your investigations on Ridgeland Farms. So viewers asked then, and they continue to ask, why are puppies needed for lab experiments? So, and like the other question was, is there a better way to test new drugs? So what did you find?
I feel like I do these stories and I learn so much about subjects I knew nothing about. This all started, of course, with Ridgeland Farms, and we do the story and we got an outpouring of comments from viewers. Some who said, what can we do to save those animals? Or why are they needed for scientific experiments? And one of the things I was learning as I did the reporting on this was to get away from animal experiments, you've got to have these new technologies. And we're right now in a time, it just happens to be a time of great flux in that area. The technology is getting better. There are opportunities to do things that reduce the need for animals and eventually may replace them. And so I wanted to find out more, instead of just saying there are these other technologies, what are they? What do they actually entail, and where are they in their development? How does it work? So that's kind of where we all started with this. And you know, as I said, I think about all the years that we've used terms like you say someone's a lab rat, or oh, we're going to use them as our guinea pig. But if you step back and think about it, well, that's because you're talking about how for generations animals have been used in laboratory testing, because we don't want to test things we don't know how they work or if they work on humans.
Right. Well, you see them on products too. You know, you'll see it, you know, not tested on animals or.
And that's
whatever.
because it's become obviously increasingly controversial over the years. Once people start to understand that, well, especially if they identify, well, animals experience pain, animals experience suffering. And now we know, wait a minute, we're not testing this stuff on humans because we don't want it to be unethically uncomfortable, or we don't want humans to suffer. Well, then are we doing that to animals? And then it comes down to, well, what animals are we talking about? I don't know about you guys. I think most people go, whether they should or they shouldn't, they go, mice, rats, fine.
Right.
But then you go rabbits. Oh, my daughter has a rabbit that she had, the 4-H thing. Or then you go, and then you start talking pigs, and then
house pets.
Okay, well, pigs are farm animals, and then we do a story with puppies.
It's this morality question, this balancing act of, do we feel comfortable, you know, inflicting pain on these animals in the name of scientific progress? That's a really interesting balancing act. Is there growing public sentiment against animal testing?
Well, I think it's interesting because when I started this, I thought when we did the Ridgeland Farm story to begin with that we would get, as we do with many controversial issues, you get yelled at from both sides, right? And what we really got was a very one-sided response, largely with people who were just concerned for the animals. And as I've done more research, it seems that it is, I thought perhaps this would be a partisan issue. We're in an agricultural state. Maybe outstate Republicans would say, who cares about animals so much? They're just, you know, it's livestock. That's not been what I found. It's, in fact, surveys are showing that there is a growing sentiment toward moving toward technologies that can get us away from animal testing. I think the more we learn about these opportunities to do new things and the more we learn about what animals might go through in laboratory experiments, there seems to be a growing sentiment in that way. That's, of course, a generalization. And you made a really important point, which we're going to talk about in this podcast, too. At what cost do you move away from that? Because animals have done a lot for drug development, for therapeutics, for discovery, that things that have helped humans in ways that we take for granted today. So it's a difficult balancing act, but there does appear to be growing sentiment. And I think it is propelled by the fact that now it's realistic to talk about doing something different. You have these other technologies that actually make it something that's possible.
Well, and the thing is, like with science especially, and testing things, whether it's drugs or products that we use every day, in the technology that we have now, it's not, at some point you have to mimic what a human is. And so, or something that has similar genes or the makeup of stuff. And so, like, there are scientists that are working to do just that, so that we don't have to test necessarily on animals, right?
Well, and that's the thing. So if you aren't going to test, say you're developing a treatment for, pick a disease, name the disease, and you say, we'll call it X disease for the sake of this. You want to solve X disease. You can't just start trying stuff in humans.
Right, yeah.
But once you've developed something, you go, well, let's give this a shot. So you start in animals, because why animals? Well, animals aren't humans, but they have biological similarities. Yeah. And as you go from mice up to ultimately non-human primates, monkeys, you get more and more of a biology that is similar to humans, but it's still not a human. So what seems to be, and we'll talk to one of the people who's doing this right now about this, doing this kind of research, animal testing, one of the drawbacks is that while animals are accessible and it's not a human to test something in, they're not always like humans. They don't always respond. So there is a lot of failure. Drugs that seem to work, they start by, hey, we've seen progress in mice. How many times have we run news stories that they've discovered in mice that they can do this? And then it gets to humans and they go, oh, it didn't work that way. Or it worked, but with this terrible side effect.
Yeah.
So the closer you get to a human model, the more likely maybe you are to find success. But even then, they're still finding this high failure rate. So if you can get technologies that better mimic an actual human, in this case, we're going to talk to someone about the human brain. If you can mimic something that's very close to the human brain, can you test drugs that will show how that drug will react in an actual human brain? Do you get a more efficient and successful test? I guess that's what we're still waiting to see validated, but that's certainly where the technology is going.
Yeah, I think anyone who watched your story was understanding that it was complex stuff, right? It was not probably easy for you to boil this down and try to explain it in layman's terms. Can you tell us a bit about what's important to learn from those STEM farm folks in Madison? There were scientists you spoke with there?
Yeah, we're going to talk in a little bit to Stephen Vasuri, who's CEO of STEM Farm. So I'll let him go in better detail. But I talked to him when we were doing the story. I said, the challenge here is I have to understand it first, because I can't boil it down to something that others will understand if I don't get it. And at first, as they were walking me through it, it's funny because when you know something really well and you're in the weeds, you think you're probably dumbing it down. And then you go, but Brian's a lot dumber than I thought. So I've got to dumb it down even more. And I was really trying to, but they were great. Stephen and Connie, who's the chief operating officer, were great because I kept coming back to them with questions. Well, wait a minute. Does it mean this? Or if I say it this way, is that accurate? And they were great about saying, actually, okay, you've got it. That works. So that when I was trying to simplify it, it made sense to give and I'll let Stephen go into more detail, but essentially what they're doing is they've created, and this goes back to stem cells. Stem cells were controversial for a long time because they were in the beginning embryonic stem cells. And then you have the whole question of, are we using embryos? And this becomes a whole abortion debate and an ethical debate over whether you should be using those cell lines. But eventually it was discovered in the University of Wisconsin, right here in Madison, Wisconsin, was where this all really started, is discovering first embryonic stem cells and then how to turn adult, what they call somatic, I believe, cells, adult, specific organ cells, how to turn them into stem cells that are adult stem cells. Basically, it's like taking an organ that's part of your heart or your stomach or your lungs or your brain and actually turning it into a cell that can become all these other sorts of things. In the story, I think there was the phrase, it's kind of like a factory reset. So you've got your phone that's got all your specific stuff, and it's an AT&T phone, but you factory reset it, and now you can take it anywhere. That's what they do with these stem cells. So first, they get these adult stem cells from blood or I think skin. They sort of reprogram them to stem cells, and then they're able to manipulate those cells to make them, say, a brain cell so we can study the brain, or a heart cell so we can study the heart. And at Stem Farm, they're taking what they call neural precursor cells. They were stem cells, and they're sort of on their way to becoming neurons in the brain. And now they actually do things to take those neural precursor cells and create a whole three-dimensional, like a mini. I'm about to say this thing they said, well, don't confuse people by calling it a mini brain. It's not a mini brain, but that's the easiest way to understand it. In these little tiny, experimental bubbles, they've got this whole three-dimensional environment with not just neurons, but there's something called microglia, which I was, going, I don't understand what that means.
What?
But it's something that has to do with, I believe it's their immune cells, the way they interact with the neurons and all these other things. It's what makes it so much better than a two-dimensional dish. You've got this environment that's kind of like where these cells are interacting with each other in the way that a brain would. And one of my questions when we were doing this was, can it think? Like, are these little organoids, these little neural organoids, are they like in there, like
decision making?
Are they having thoughts? It's not there. It's not there. But it does raise these sort of existential questions,
right?
Because they're trying to make something that's more human-like. And I feel the more I talk about this, that I just need to let Steven explain all of that, because I'm probably not doing very well.
It's very humbling, isn't it, to take on a complex topic and realize how much you didn't know about it, or how hard it is for you to grasp it. That's what I was thinking when I was watching it. Like, he must have worked really hard to try to understand this.
Well, what I think's so exciting, though, is when they talked about what they're doing. So they created this little mini environment that's like the sort of, the brain organoid, the neural organoid. It's one thing to have a healthy one, but then what they have to do is they have to take that organoid and make it a model of something that is sick. In this case, Alzheimer's. So they actually create that organoid as though it is a brain with Alzheimer's. And now the next step will be to find treatments that fix that, or that help that. And I don't understand how they do it, but the idea is fascinating. And I think maybe that's a good time. Do you think we should just break and bring Steven in and have him tell us more about this? Let's do that. We're going to take a break here on Open Record. When we come back, we will have Steven Vasuri with Stem Farm in Madison, and we'll talk to him right after this. And welcome back to Open Record. We are joined by Steven Vasuri, the Chief Executive Officer of Stem Farm, and farm is spelled PHARM because like pharmaceutical. Steven, first of all, thank you for being here on Open Record.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be with you.
So the first question off the bat, explain to our listeners, our viewers who haven't seen the story, who haven't had the time I have to sit down with you, what is Stem Farm and why do you exist?
Sure. So first, Brian, I've got to give you an honorary scientific degree. You answered the science beautifully. So congrats on that.
Well, you're a good teacher.
Yeah, so Stem Farm has been around for 10 years. We were a spin-out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison and really was created around these, you've been talking about these brain organoids, these stem cell-derived models of the brain, because we saw, the founders of the company saw the great opportunity to use those for drug discovery. So these induced pluripotent stem cell models were starting to take off at this time, but it was still very early days. And we saw the opportunity where we think we could make an impact and really change the way drugs are discovered by using these models. So the intention was not necessarily to displace animals. That wasn't why the company was started. That's a nice secondary benefit. It was really because we saw these new technologies had the opportunity to improve the way drugs are being developed, reduce the risks of failures in late stage drug development.
Steven, I think I know the answer to this, but maybe you can help explain kind of how far we are and how far we have yet to go. These new methods, the new technologies, the things that you guys are working on, day in and day out, are they ready to totally replace animal testing? How far are we away from that?
Yeah. You know the answer, and we're not ready to replace animals completely, but they certainly are making an impact already. So like I said, we've been at this for 10 years, really advancing the models to the point where we think they can have a significant impact, particularly right now for us on the efficacy studies. So as Bryan was mentioning, we can model things like Alzheimer's disease quite well, very specific biology in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And we think that's where we can have the biggest impact in the early phases of drug discovery, finding those small molecules that can have a benefit to Alzheimer's progression. But that, by no means can that replace all the studies that need to be done to bring a drug to market. So even in, once we look to find a drug that has early efficacy, we still need to know, is that drug going to be safe? So you need to do distribution studies, pharmacokinetic studies, absorption studies, excretion studies, and that's impossible to do in our brain model, right? You need a whole organ system, and this is where we still feel animals have a place in drug development. And so our development plans certainly include the use of animals because there's no alternatives right now that can have that complex biology captured. But these new approach methods are really starting to make an impact in drug discovery for sure. We're just not there yet for replacing animals.
Stephen, what does it take to get to that next level where it can be used to replace? Is it a lot of funding? What do you need? Are we decades away, you think?
A lot of funding, a lot of concerted efforts. So we need to establish a large body of data to show that these new approach methods can displace animal studies, and some animal studies are very, very good, and some animal studies are not very predictable. And so it's really finding where these new approach methods can displace animals effectively, and that's going to take some time, going to take some resources, and then we need to establish standards, bodies of standards and quality attributes for these, so everybody's working off the same set of standards, and the FDA can recognize one approach is similar to somebody else's approach. So a lot of time and resources need to go into this. It's really hard to predict timing on when we can start to really appreciably reduce the use of animals. I think in addition to these new approach methods, things like artificial intelligence, which is often overhyped, but I think will have a significant impact here as well, can really accelerate the reduction in the use of animals. So is it a decade away? Probably, maybe more than that.
I know when we're in your lab, we see a lot of the stuff that's going on in the laboratory. It makes good TV because it's visual. You're dropping little things into whatever plates, and there's that 3-dimensional. But I'm just saying,
He's gonna take back your honorary
whatever plates he says.
I don't know what those are called, but. It's an 8. What was it? Like a 64 well plate or 96 well plate or something like that. It was a big one. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know what that means. What I do know is we look at the stuff that looked visual for television. We talked about the 3-dimensional models, but what we couldn't really show, and I know I talked to Connie about this, is just how much computing power was necessary to take the data and actually do something with it. And it seems like that wouldn't have been possible maybe even just a few years ago. Is that also helping to advance this technology? You mentioned AI. Just the sheer computing power to actually get something out of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we do a couple of different methods of analysis. We do quite a bit of imaging, so confocal imaging, which takes up an incredible amount of storage and data processing. And then we do a lot of transcriptional studies. So you're looking at what genes are being affected by the diseases and by the treatments, and that requires terabytes, just an incredible amount of data to store and process that information. So correct, that is really only been made possible in the last decade or so. And then AI is really making impacts to drug discovery in numerous ways, and we expect that will have an impact on our business as well. So all these technologies are coming on so rapidly right now, and it's really exciting to see the pace of progress.
One of the things that you guys are really focused on is Alzheimer's disease and testing and working toward that treatment. And the sound, the interview we heard with, on Bryan's story was emotional. And so, talk about some of these illnesses and the diseases that you guys are really trying to tackle, and how it's more than just finding it. It hits close to home for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all scientists generally here, and so we love the science and the technology. But what really drives us is making an impact on the world. It's what's really driven my career as well. So you talk about Alzheimer's, right? That's our primary program. All of the founders of the company have had or currently are struggling with family members with Alzheimer's disease. We had done a significant customer discovery project, talked to about 150 people who are sort of involved in Alzheimer's discovery and research, and that included many patient families. And just the stories we hear are just so passionate. And it's really motivating for us to then try to get back in the lab and try to develop the next generation of drugs, which will have an impact on Alzheimer's disease. The other diseases that we're really passionate about that we're developing treatments for epilepsy. Again, we have lots of friends and family members who have suffered from epilepsy and seizures in the past. We're also working on glioblastoma, and I've talked to a number of people who have lost loved ones to glioblastoma, just a really terrible disease. So these are the kinds of things that really motivate us to get in the lab, do the hard work, and hopefully make an impact.
Stephen, I think about you mentioned that you do this sort of early stage research. Eventually, if you get to a stage where you have something that looks promising, there's going to be a pharmaceutical company that's going to come in and they're going to say, okay, we're going to pay for the big rounds, the next stuff we get to the human trials, whatever it is. But along the way, along that path, it's obviously there's still, you mentioned that animals are still a piece of that because of where we are right now. Is there a place for a combination of the new technology and animals where you're reducing the need for them, but does that make better testing? Does that make better development if you're doing it in combination?
Yeah, I think you'll learn something from both, right? So that's why in our program studies we've got animal studies planned, but we also intend to approach the FDA early on and ask what studies can we eliminate because we think these new approach methods are better and more predictable than animal studies, and what animal studies are still required. So it's really the combination right now I think is necessary. Like I said, maybe it's a decade off, but at some point hopefully we'll have a significant reduction in animals. We're part of an organization called the 3Rs Collaborative, and their mission is to really reduce, refine, and change the way animals are used in research. And they're not advocating for the complete elimination either, because they see there's a purpose in it. But I think for cost and ethical and some moral reasons, everybody would love to see less animals used, but nobody wants unsafe drugs to reach the market either.
Does it seem like the FDA or agencies like the NIH are supportive of replacing these methods?
Absolutely. So the NIH has sponsored a large amount of our work, and they've supported our development of these new approach methods, and that's been going on for a number of years. What's more recent is they both, FDA and NIH, came out with some pretty bold statements that they have roadmaps now to really reduce the use of animals, and they're more and more accepting of drug companies bringing their regulatory packages to them with less and less animal studies, and hopefully one day no animal studies involved. In fact, I think there's been a drug that was brought to market with no animal data. It was, I think, a repurposed drug, so the prior version probably had animals data to support it. But that's just a very encouraging sign. So they are starting to put resources toward this. They're starting to put significant planning, and I think in the past it was probably more talk than action, and I feel like now it's tipped to more action than talk. So this is a fabulous progress.
We said earlier, that obviously funding is an important piece of this. I mean, follow the money. That's where the research is going to be. When you get FDA and the National Institutes of Health both saying they're strongly behind this, they want to start moving toward replacing animal testing, does it make it easier on the grant side, on the trying to go out and get funding for the stuff you're doing, to say, not only do we think this is great or we think this is better, but the FDA and NIH have said this is what they want to see? Does that help?
Yeah, we certainly hope so, right? So we pursue funding through both grants and venture investors. And we see over the last couple of years that there's been this movement towards the use of these new approach methods and stem cell-based models. So that's been gaining traction. But yeah, the statements by the FDA and the NIH, so we've certainly entertained a number of conversations recently just because of that, and thanks to the news piece that you had done as well. So that hopefully will turn into increased funding opportunities for us, both from grants and from venture community.
One last question for you. What's the next step in the Alzheimer's model? What are you hoping to do with that next?
Yeah, so that's we're super excited about the model that we have. So if you follow the field of Alzheimer's, there's been some new therapeutics that have reached the market in the last couple of years that target the clearance of amyloid plaques in the brain, and those that's a great sign. But those are not perfect therapies, and so there's a need for the next generation. And so what we have particularly modeled, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, is the ability to model neural inflammation that's involved in Alzheimer's, very early Alzheimer's formation and progression. And so we are using our brain organoid model to model a genetic driver of Alzheimer's disease that causes neuroinflammation and looking to discover small molecule drugs. And so we're starting to screen libraries of compounds against our model, and hopefully we'll find some good candidates to bring forward.
Well, Stephen Vasuri, really appreciate your time and your help in bringing this to everyone in a way we can understand it. So thank you so much for being here on Open Record.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks very much.
All right. And, he mentioned that there's clearly a movement to reduce and eliminate animal testing. It's not going away anytime soon, right? Our next guest has something to say about why animal testing is still important to human health. Paula Clifford with Americans for Medical Progress. We will talk to her right after the break.
Welcome back to Open Record, and we are joined now by Paula Clifford. She is Executive Director of Americans for Medical Progress. Paula, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. First of all, for our listeners and our viewers, can you tell us what is AMP and what is your overall mission?
Sure. Americans for Medical Progress, or AMP, is a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is to keep medical advances moving ahead. And so we do that through providing public education programs about biomedical research and the process of biomedical research. And we also provide support for scientists as well as research institutions on communicating about their work for the public, including when their work involves animals.
I know you've been listening in for the last, 20 or 25 minutes to what we've been talking about. As you've been listening, what stood out to you? What did you want to make sure that our viewers and our listeners hear?
First of all, thank you to Stephen and the folks over at STEM Pharmaceuticals advancing your work. It's just fantastic to see how all these new technologies are really helping to fuel science and advance research. And so one of the things that really stood out to me was there is so much happening. And I want to thank you, Bryan, and your team for helping to translate this for broad audiences, because it is really complex. So the goal is about better science, and I think that's what we heard in that last segment. It's not a blanket replacement of one tool over another. Currently, animals and non-animal methods each have limitations, and each of them provide really essential insights. And so I think that's an important thing to think about. And what we're looking for is the strongest, most predictive science, and we see that when they work together.
What are some of the ways that animal testing has impacted us, aside from maybe even outside of drugs and drug treatments and stuff like that? We were talking earlier in the podcast about products, makeup, shampoos, stuff like that. How else has animal testing impacted us?
Oh gosh, yeah. Thank you for that question. And I think we all need to honor the animals that have been involved in research. Everything that we put into our bodies really are found safe and effective through animal research. So things that we buy over the counter, everything from headache medicine and Tums, gastrointestinal medicine, things like that, to really specialized medicines to treat cancer and other things. All of that has come to us because of the work of scientists using animals in research.
I think it's important to acknowledge that, because people might speak out against animal testing while at the same time they might benefit from medications that were tested on animals. So obviously that progress is important. Can you talk a bit about when people see beagle puppies being used in lab experiments? What do you say to those who say, why do we have to use these animals that people love so much?
Yeah, I know it can be difficult and emotional. So we have seen, obviously, we love animals. All of us love animals. We've seen an increased concern for animals and animal welfare over the last 20, 30 years. Just look at how much we spend on our pets. I think probably about, 10 years ago, we spent about $60 billion on our pets. And I read a report the other day that in 2025, we'll spend close to $160 billion on our pets.
I believe that.
And so I think that people should realize that we all love animals, and including, the dogs that are involved in the research. And these animals are cared for by a dedicated team of highly specialized veterinarians, technicians, animal care professionals to make sure that when an animal is involved in research, whether it's a dog or a mouse or a monkey or anything else, that there are people who love animals and are there to ensure their welfare and to make sure that they're absolutely necessary to be on the studies.
So you obviously are aware of the FDA and NIH making these pretty bold statements that they want to move away. In fact, I think the FDA's first sentence of its press release on April 29th or April 10th was that it's a groundbreaking step to replace animal testing. So they're talking about replacement. When you hear that, first of all, from your organization standpoint, what is your take on that? What do you make of the federal government saying we want to make it a priority to move away from this kind of testing?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fantastic. But I think it's important to realize that this isn't really a sudden shift in agency policy. These are the results of long-standing scientific efforts that have been happening for years. So, for example, the FDA has been systematically working towards reducing animal use for many years. For example, the agency has a new alternatives methods program. And that involves various working groups that aim to expand processes to both qualify alternative methods and provide guidelines to stakeholders on how to safely develop and use them. And so, as you heard, the new technologies are really complex and they still need validation before they're broadly used. And so I think that these public announcements are great because they are bringing more attention to the issue, hopefully bringing more funding to move these things forward. But these are things that have been happening over, many, 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 many years.
When I was reading through some of those releases from NIH and FDA, there was one thing, and I think this is in the FDA's statement, that they talked specifically about incentivizing these new methods by streamlining approvals and their reviews and things like that. For those that are still doing traditional animal testing, is that a concern, or what do you make of this idea of actually giving sort of incentives and streamlined processes for these new methods?
I think that, so they did, you probably know, they talked about a roadmap, and I think what they're moving towards, if you looked at the roadmap, you can see it implemented sort of a stepwise approach to focus on replacement is feasible. So I think really being able to put together systems where, you can sort of replace animals in areas where it's feasible. So let me give you an example. And this is not my area of expertise. We do follow the policies. We try to translate them. But getting into the very deep details, I probably would have to get back to you on certain things. So, for example, replacing certain primate tests in monoclonal antibody testing has been under review for many years, okay? But more complex drugs or conditions would still, so that might be something that could be replaced sooner, so there's efforts to sort of work out, what can we get that to that next step? But there's other, more complex drugs and conditions that still need whole body organism data to ensure the safety. So the FDA does require that a method is reliable and predictive for human outcomes, and this process can take years of testing, refinement, and regulatory review. So there are committees together that are sort of looking at this to figure out what is the minimum, what is the criteria on sort of taking some of these tests that we've been working on for years, and how do we get that to the next step so that the regulators feel confident in accepting those non-animal tests. And also the companies who are wanting to put their drugs forward also feel confident, because of course they are very concerned about human safety, and they want to make sure that it's going to be safe for humans before it gets there. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think I just wondered if the more traditional route, if there's a concern that these new methods are going to be getting sort of an incentive or maybe a leg up, or is that is that what needs to happen to get these developed and ready, like you said, to get them validated where we know that they are effective? Because it's one thing to say you want to move away from animals. You have to know that the new method's going to work, because if it doesn't, then we don't get drugs that work, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't much of a question, was it? That was really more of a statement, I think.
Period.
Well, I mean, there are, I think it just boils down to what the best science is and moving that forward. And so if a new technology, of course, there's incentives to replace animals, But the goal is not about replacing animals. It's about the best science. What is the best method to get that answer, to move that science forward, to be able to get to that cure or treatment faster. So that is where, that is where the focus is and should be. And we heard that earlier in this podcast.
So to that end, do you think the animal testing will ever go away completely, or do you think that there can be a balance, to your point, with depending on what the science needs?
I want to say that animals testing or animal studies can go away completely, but I don't see how that can happen for certain things. So for example, not sure how a non-animal model is going to be able to evaluate things in the mental health areas of research, for example, with behavior and learning about learning and memory. Plus, there's lots of animals that we're studying because they're different from us. So studying the brains of octopus, for example. Octopus are amazing animals. They can learn from others sort of like we can in a way. And so continuing to study, animals to really be able to see what's different and to then maybe to get inferences or apply that to human medicine is possible. And then also animal research for animals. So we care about our pets, we care about animals. And so dogs and cats involved in research, lots of them are in research to help other dogs and cats.
Can we talk about funding? Because funding is always a big concern, but especially under this current administration, are you at all worried that, a shift to favor new technologies will be at the expense of funding for traditional research?
I do worry about that because there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation about how far these new technologies are. And so if policymakers and, members of the general public truly believe that there are non-animal technologies that can fully replace animals, I could certainly see funding being diverted towards those methods and even legislation being passed to ban animal studies before its time.
I want to ask you, I want to give you an opportunity to say one thing, because I know some people watching this who've been following our coverage of Ridgeland Farms are going to say, okay, but none of this justifies mistreatment of animals. And I'm not asking you to comment on Ridgeland Farms because I know you don't know the ins and outs of that. But I want to be clear that you're not supporting any place that would mistreat animals. You actually talked earlier about the great care animals should be given when they're going through any kind of laboratory research, right?
100%. Yes. Animals, it's a privilege that we're able to work with animals in research. Like I said, when I started, we need to honor their role and what they've helped us accomplish till now and will continue. And we need to continue to do better. And we have done better. So, the way animals were cared for, the procedures that we used with animals, the way that they were housed has evolved. A great example is mice, for example. It used to be proper technique to pick up a mouse by its tail, but we've learned that can be stressful for a mouse. And now the research institutions are starting to find new ways to even just pick up a mouse, to put them into a clean cage using cupped hands or tunnel handling and things like that. So we need to do better. Animals need to be cared for in the best way possible. And no, mistreatment is never okay.
The last question I'll ask you is this. I know that there was in that roadmap you talked about the FDA has, they talked about this first sort of phase where there's focusing on drugs that monoclonal antibodies, which asked me to explain what that means. And I don't know. I know it's a particular type of drug. But they're saying that they see the potential long-term goal of 3 to 5 years, making animal testing for those types of drugs the exception rather than the norm. Does that seem realistic? Is that too ambitious? What do you think of that?
If I'm not an expert in monoclonal antibody testing, but if the agency is saying that they like to move away from that from 3 to 5 years, I have to say it's because, and I know that is an area of research that has been focused on for a very long time. So that tells me that it's close to being able to do that, which is fantastic.
Well, Paula Clifford, Executive Director of Americans for Medical Progress, we really appreciate your time, especially I gave you short notice on this one. Thank you for taking the time to be here on Open Record.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you do here.
And we will go off the record when we come right back. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun. Call it fun if you will. But whatever, we answer a question that Sarah has prepared for us. We don't know what it's going to be. So
I'm going to start with that. In some stories, our editor, Dave Machuda, we kind of joke because Bryan sometimes will explain something. He'll take a long time to explain something.
In other words.
And he'll go, in other words. I feel like this story, this whole string of scientific stuff, this was a perfect opportunity to use in other words.
And I didn't.
And you didn't. So that's a missed opportunity.
No, because I would have had to use it too many times.
That's fine.
Every 5
but that's
sentences
all I can
would have
think
been
about
in
with
other
like
words.
as
Yeah.
they're doing all these scientific terms, and I'm like, what?
But you guys have made me so aware of that. Now I'm hyper aware that
And
I
now
was
you
writing
don't do
another
it.
story that's going to be airing in a week or two. And toward the end, there was a perfect opportunity for it in other words. And I said, I can't.
Delete.
It's my crutch.
I know. So,
But yeah.
sorry for that editorial. Okay. Also, Bryan, you're going on a little getaway and you're going to need to pack, right?
That's true.
Okay.
Yes.
So the question, which actually was also sent in by editor Dave Machuda, how many pair of underwear do you pack for a week-long trip? So
a week long.
You are there 7 days. How many?
I don't go on many week-long trips.
Let's
but-
just pretend. Let's
Okay.
suspend some
All right.
reality.
First of all, I just want to point out that when you say I'm going on a getaway, people are like, oh, is he going to something like Italy or Scotland
where
or
are
something?
you
Where I
going?
hear other people, I'm going to the Northwoods. We're going to a cabin.
That's
It's going to be
that's a
fun.
getaway.
It's going to be fantastic.
Oh, it's going to
but
be
it is-
great.
It is a getaway. So for me, I try to take 2 pair per day
Okay. Yep.
because I
It's
think
good to overpack on this particular
that,
item.
Yes.
that item is one I don't want to be short on. Yeah.
That's
No.
fair.
you
Because
can
I'm gonna-
rewear jeans. You can rewear other things. I'm
like
not
even a
re-wearing-
shirt, which I wouldn't like to do, but you're right. And like, you never know. Are we going to go for a little hike? And then I'm going to shower midday, and I'm
Right.
certainly not putting on.
You put them back on.
skivvies.
Mm-mm,
Right.
Nope, right.
No, ma'am.
I had a trip recently. I'm already laughing. Where I didn't pack enough,
Yeah.
and I found myself looking at my 9-year-old's underwear, being like, "Could I?
Hold up.
Could if I stretch these leg holes? Can I make this
So
work?"
tight. We went to
I-
Florida once, and Eric, my husband, didn't pack anything, like no undies. I had to go to like a store, a Walmart or whatever, and come back. And I was like, geez, like, do I have to help you with everything? But
I
yes.
recently went to visit my dear, wonderful mother in St. Louis. Went for a weekend. I packed everything. I overpacked the socks and
Of
I
course.
had running clothes if I wanted to go
Yeah.
running or whatever. I completely missed the underwear drawer.
Oh my
I
gosh.
went to Walmart or somewhere,
Yeah,
Target,
right,
whatever
yeah.
it was, and I bought some brand. And you
Yeah.
know what? You buy some brand new stuff. It
It's
just
kind of
feels
fun.
good. I think underwear and
trip is
socks.
good.
Underwear and socks.
Just
When you
for
get
you.
new,
There
it
is
just feels
something
good.
about it.
Yeah.
Dang.
So-
Okay. All right. So 2
2 a day.
per
Yeah.
2 per day. Okay. Gosh, that's all I had. What else can
Well,
we
I
talk
mean,
about?
do you guys overpack in general? Because my husband gives me a hard time because I tend to overpack because I will fill the suitcase I'm given.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Like
Yes.
even if
Yeah.
I'm going for 3 days, I will fill the
space.
suitcase. Just be like, well, I have room. Maybe I'll pack for more weather options, or maybe
Well,
I'll
that's-
go for a run and I'll
Yes.
take my run.
I do
learned- yeah.
laugh. Yeah.
Do you ever notice that what you just said too? You're about to go on a trip and you have this great ambition that, well, what if I go on a run
Oh my
every morning
gosh.
and you pack
Yes.
all the stuff to run every day and then you don't go once?
Or you're like, what if I dress up? I better pack 4 dresses. I'm going to the lake. I'm not going to dress
What
up
if we
ever.
decide to go out to dinner one night?
Or like, I'll bring my straightener and my blow dryer and all my makeup and things that I don't use, my straightener, my blow dryer, and my
Right.
makeup. I'm like,
the other question is, how many cables are you taking with you? Because I've got,
yeah.
I'll bring the
Yeah.
plug-in thing that's got the USBs and the whatever, and
Yeah.
I've got my,
How
the
many
Apple
pucks
Watch
do you
charger
have?
and the
Yeah.
other things. And so I have a whole, it probably looks like when I go through TSA, they're like, we should, single this guy out. He's got a lot of wires in there. I don't know
so
what it
many
is.
cables. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then do you put them? I just put them in a Ziploc bag. That's
Oh, I put everything in Ziploc
okay.
bags.
Me too.
Yeah.
I don't have any like special bags for them.
I should put them in Ziploc bags, but
Oh my
they're
gosh,
just
they're just
stuffed into
loose?
a pocket. Yeah,
Oh,
right.
geez.
That's
Yeah.
probably why I
That's
get pulled
stressful.
aside for
Right.
an extra scan.
I need to buy some like real toothbrush holders or things rather than sticking everything in a Ziploc bag. I have the gallon sized ones, so for like all the shampoos and everything.
and then I open up because I want to save them, right? Like, so I'm like, these are perfectly good bags. So then when
put
I
them in a
have to
drawer when you
repack,
get there?
I open up the toiletry bag and it pops out all of the empty Ziploc bags.
Last thing you just said, you said toiletry bag. I was going to ask,
Yes.
do any of you call it something else? Do you call it a DOP kit?
What?
No.
Okay.
What?
DOP kit was named after a guy whose last name was Dopp. And
I've never heard that.
Like,
I've never heard that
created these
either.
for the military. So I had heard people call them DOP kits, but I wondered where the name came from. If you hear someone say DOP kit, you know what they're talking about. We will wrap things up when we come right back. And that is all the time we have for Open Record this week. I want to thank all the people who make this podcast possible, including executive producer Sarah Smith, Jenna Sachs, Contact 6, Tim Primo, who is manning the video switcher today, our executive producer, not executive
That's
producer, our chief
me,
photographer. It's still you. Chief photographer kills me. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. I get to home and pack 2 pairs of underwear for every day. I'll be
Into
gone.
your docket.
But we'll see you next week. With that, I'm Bryan Polcyn. See you then.